So the College Football Playoff Committee came out with their second rankings, the Week 12 rankings, and I got some questions. Overall, I thought it was okay, but there are a couple of things that jumped out to me, uh, mainly with the ACC, and I think that's been the talk. It's been the story of the second ranking overall. At the top is basically the same. Top five teams remain the same. Texas Tech with their big win over BYU, they move up to number six. I think the APs liked them all season. The committee likes them as well, clearly, and I think rightly so. They've won games very convincingly, with the exception of that loss, of course, to Arizona State. But overall, I think they've done really well. They're sitting there at six, and then Ole Miss, Oregon, Notre Dame, Texas, Oklahoma. I think that's basically the same order as last week. BYU drops down to 12, which is right where we thought we'd have them, just ahead of Utah. Right, obviously they got the head-to-head, so the committee respecting the head-to-head there. And then Vanderbilt, Miami, and Georgia Tech. And that's kind of what first jumped out to me here is Miami was behind Georgia Tech last week in the first committee rankings, and they're ahead of them now. Georgia Tech was on bye. Miami beat Syracuse by 28. The line was 28 and a half, so that was basically what we expected. Yet Miami jumps Georgia Tech, and I think that was really weird. I think it was really weird. I think the committee probably has this right, to be honest with you. Miami's win over Notre Dame and their blowout win against USF is better than anything Georgia Tech's done all season. That being said, that was true last week, right? And if the committee thinks that Miami's resume is better today than it was, or than Georgia Tech's is today, that probably should have been the case last week as well. So I really don't know what changed in the committee's mind to jump Miami over Georgia Tech, other than maybe some outside pressure. Folks in the media talking about how Miami might have been a little too low. I think that's maybe the only argument for Miami jumping Georgia Tech. This week, right? That or just the committee realizing that they had them too low last week, and I think that opens up a couple possibilities. One, it's notice the gap between Notre Dame and Miami is Notre Dame's at 9, Miami's at 15 right now. So if Miami wins out, I'm not sure who else they have in their schedule. Obviously, they got Florida at the end of the season. They played Pitt the week before that, I think. So they got a couple. The Pitt win could be a good win in their resume. And if teams ahead of them fall, Miami can kind of backdoor their way into an into an at-large bid, even if they don't make the ACC championship game. I think that's something that's kind of opened up with Miami jumping Georgia Tech this week. The other thing is that Georgia Tech's resume is just not being respected by the committee, which is really bad for the ACC here. I think a lot of folks have been talking about how the ACC might miss the playoffs entirely, right? Duke can win the ACC at 9-4 and be ranked behind James Madison and USF or Tulane or whoever wins the American, and the ACC champ might miss the playoffs entirely, and obviously you don't really want to hang your hat on Miami getting that at-large bid or Georgia Tech getting that large bid, given what the committee's told us they think about Georgia Tech's resume. So, I think that was something that really stood out here is the ACC just again still ranking way behind even the Big 12. Right, last week we had 3 Big 12 teams ranked ahead of any ACC team. Virginia was the highest ranked team at 15. Now Miami's the highest ranked team at 15, and you got 3 Big 12 teams still ahead of them. Right, Texas Tech at 6, BYU at 12, and Utah at 13. I think that Utah one is particularly striking, right? Because Utah, on the surface, does not have a crazy good resume, and they got blown out by Texas Tech, and they got I don't want to say dominated, but I think they lost fairly convincingly to BYU. And so Utah doesn't really have all that great of a resume. They have 2 losses, and they're still ahead of Miami. They're still ahead of Miami with that win against Notre Dame, a Notre Dame team that the committee clearly likes. Not to mention a 49-12 win against a ranked USF team. So I think that's strange, honestly, that Miami's behind Utah. I like Vandy a lot, but even that, there's a good argument for Miami being ahead of Vandy. And so the fact that Miami's behind both of those teams, the fact that Georgia Tech is behind 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 2-loss teams. I think it's 6 2. It might be 5 or 6. I think it's 6 2 loss teams. Georgia Tech with one loss against NC State is behind 6 2 loss teams. That says a lot about what the committee thinks about the ACC, and it's not good. And it's a really bad sign for the ACC. It's a really bad sign for Miami because they're probably not making the ACC championship game. It's a really bad sign for Georgia Tech if they don't take care of business against Pitt in a couple weeks and then eventually in the ACC championship game. And I know the committee actually addressed this, and they were talking about how the ACC doesn't have a whole lot of great out of conference wins, right? And they don't. That's true. Miami's win over Notre Dame, and I guess to a lesser extent, Florida State's win over Alabama are really only marquee wins out of conference, right? I mean, Georgia Tech's out of conference win is at Colorado by a possession. Virginia and Louisville haven't really done a whole lot out of conference. Pitt lost to West Virginia, albeit before the quarterback change. But the ACC is not doing a whole lot to help their case out of conference. But I feel like the Big 12 hasn't done a whole lot either. I mean, the Big 12 has a couple wins with Baylor and SMU beating SMU. Baylor and TCU beating SMU out of conference. You know, that's kind of the head-to-head comparison between the Big 12 and the ACC. But, you know, I feel like the ACC is kind of getting shafted here compared to the Big 12. And we'll see. Obviously, this will kind of work itself out because Virginia is playing Duke this week. Georgia Tech plays Pitt in a couple weeks. Louisville plays SMU. You know, Pitt plays Miami after that. So you're going to have a team kind of emerge from the ashes here, hopefully, for the ACC's sake. You know, with a couple quality wins in conference, hopefully an okay out of conference schedule, and a playoff caliber resume. And the same thing's going to happen in the Big 12 to a lesser extent. I guess it's already happened for the most part, but you'll have a rematch, and most likely a rematch between Texas Tech and someone in the Big 12 championship game. So I think this will work itself out, but not a good sign for the ACC is the big takeaway from this second committee ranking. A couple other things I wanted to touch on. Iowa still getting ranked, you know, after the loss against Oregon. They're at 21, and Tennessee also at 6-3 at 23. Honestly, I don't have a big problem with this. I see a lot of people, you know, kind of saying, why are they there, right? I mean, they haven't beaten anybody. I don't have a huge problem. Let me clarify. I don't have a huge problem with Iowa and Tennessee being ranked. I think they're top 25 caliber teams. I think they passed the eye test in that manner. You see the way Iowa played against Indiana, the way they played against Oregon. Those are both at home. I think Kinnick Stadium has a lot to do with the quality of their play. But, you know, and you see the way Tennessee played against Georgia. I think those are definitely quality teams. I don't think it's crazy that they're ranked. I do think they're pretty high at 21 and 23, given that they don't have any really quality wins. And I think the fact that Iowa at 6-3 without a quality win is only 5 spots behind Georgia Tech at 16 without any quality wins says a lot about, again, the way the committee thinks about the ACC conference schedule compared to the Big Ten and the SEC conference schedule, right? That 3 losses in Big Ten gets you at 21, and 1 loss in the ACC puts you at 16. So, not a lot of good coming out of this week from the ACC. They're 2 top-ranked teams losing, getting worse in the rankings. So, they're gonna have to hope that Georgia Tech pulls things out here in the next couple weeks, or I don't know. At least that Duke doesn't win out, and hope for the best here. But we'll see what happens in the coming weeks.